Brought to you by Thomas Allgaier and Freinis. This edition highlights key LinkedIn posts on electrification and battery technology in weeks 10 and 11. Freinis supports automotive enterprises and consultancies with market and competitive intelligence, so product teams and strategy leaders do have the optimal base for their strategic decisions.
Top electrification and battery technology trends seen across LinkedIn.
Yeah, and for you, the mobility industry professional listening today, we really have a clear mission for this deep dive. We're cutting straight through the consumer hype.
Right, no fluff today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to look at the real-world operational and economic shifts.
Yeah.
They're actually moving the needle in the EV space right now. Because honestly, we are abruptly exiting that whole Wild West land grab phase of just planting chargers in the ground?
Oh, absolutely. The market is facing a really forced maturation right now. I mean, operators can't just rely on venture capital to fund expansion anymore. They have to make the unit economics work right at the plug. And that means looking incredibly hard at supply chains, hardware margins, and basically just operational survival.
Which brings us perfectly to our first cluster, looking at charging infrastructure and market dynamics. Sayed Hassan recently published a really interesting post on EnBW.
Yeah, Germany's largest DC fast charge point operator.
Right. They manage roughly 8,000 charging points. And historically, they operated with this massive 85% reliance on just a single hardware supplier.
Alpatronic, right.
Yeah, Alpatronic. But Hassan's analysis highlighted a huge strategic shift. EnBW just brought on XCharge as their second major supplier.
Which makes total sense. I mean, from a procurement perspective, relying on one vendor for 85% of your critical infrastructure is, well, it's a massive supply chain vulnerability.
Oh, totally. If Alpatronic hits, like a manufacturing bottleneck, EnBW's entire deployment schedule just freezes.
Exactly. So by integrating XCharge, EnBW immediately gains pricing leverage for future rollouts. Hassan actually looked into XCharge's financials and noted this isn't just some casual hardware test.
Right, it's deliberate.
Yeah, it's a calculated maneuver to force vendor competition, drive down capital expenditure, and really de-risk their broader European expansion.
Which is all about stabilizing the balance sheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because operators are feeling the heat. James Tillman actually posed a really sobering thought experiment about this.
Oh, the ChargePoint one?
Yeah. He pointed out the trajectory of ChargePoint, which is, one of the original behemoths in the EV charging space. 5 years ago, ChargePoint carried a valuation of $6 billion.
Wow.
Today. Their market cap is hovering around roughly $130 million.
That is a brutal drop.
It is. It really shows that having a massive installed base and strong brand recognition just isn't enough when the underlying business model is fundamentally commoditized.
Because the hardware margins are notoriously thin.
Yeah.
And maintaining the software backend to deliver that high uptime that drivers expect, it's just an endless drain on operating expenses.
Yeah, OpEx is just bleeding them.
Right. And Tillman's observation raises the very real prospect that we are entering an era of massive industry consolidation. But, the pressure on OpEx isn't just coming from software maintenance or grid fees.
No, there's a physical side, too. Aurélien Demeaux brought up a physical vulnerability that operators are really struggling to model. Organized sabotage.
Oh, the copper theft.
Yeah.
Demeaux's data on this is actually alarming. We usually model uptime failures around, communication glitches or a broken payment terminal.
Right, normal wear and tear.
Yeah, but operators are now dealing with organized gangs who are systematically severing charging cables to strip and resell the copper.
And this isn't just random vandalism, right?
No, it's coordinated theft, and it's happening almost every single night across European networks.
That is wild. And the financial impact goes way beyond just the cost of buying a replacement cable. Demeaux notes that the frequency of these attacks is rendering many charging sites effectively uninsurable.
Uninsurable. Wow.
Yeah. And when you can't insure the physical asset, the entire financial model used to secure project funding just collapses. Plus, you have drivers arriving at stations that are completely out of commission.
Which instantly breaks brand trust.
Exactly. While the operator bleeds capital trying to secure a site that wasn't even designed for high security monitoring in the first place.
Demeaux makes a powerful point there. But I do think the industry often over-indexes on those highly visible hardware risks like theft, while quietly bleeding customers through software and support friction every single day.
Oh, you mean Bradford Christ's analysis?
Yes. He noticed a trend where charging networks are actively hiding their customer support phone numbers on the physical chargers. They're trying to force drivers into using automated chatbots or digital ticketing systems.
It's a classic short-sighted cost-saving measure. An operator looks at the balance sheet, they see the call center as a massive OPEX line item, and they just decide to gatekeep it.
Right, but Kreese paints the actual user scenario here. Imagine a driver is sitting in the rain, they have exactly 12% battery left, kids are crying in the back seat, and the payment authorization fails.
A nightmare.
Total nightmare. And in that high anxiety moment, a generic submit a ticket screen doesn't just delay a charging session, it permanently destroys the relationship.
Because the math is entirely backward. They save a few euros avoiding a human support call, but they sacrifice thousands of euros in the lifetime value of that customer.
Exactly. If a driver feels abandoned at 12% battery, they will filter your specific network out of their navigation app forever. You build brand loyalty when things go wrong, and you fix them quickly, not when you hand a stranded driver a chatbot.
So true. But, okay, if the current operational baseline from supply chains down to customer support is this fragile, we have to ask a structural question. Does throwing highly expensive, ultra-fast megawatt technology at the problem actually fix the unit economics? Or does it just accelerate the cash burn?
Right, which leads us straight into cluster 2, the massive debate happening right now around technology and product reality. Because hardware manufacturers are aggressively pushing the theoretical limits of charging speeds.
Oh, yeah. Maxime Leguillot, Thomas Schmidberger, and Steve Greenfield all highlighted BYD's new 1.5 megawatt Super E platform recently.
1.5 megawatts, that's just
Massive. It utilizes BYD's Blade Battery 2.0 and claims the ability to charge a vehicle from 10% to 70% in just 5 minutes.
The engineering behind that is phenomenal, particularly the thermal management. Schmidberger actually pointed out that BYD is deploying this architecture in Harbin, China.
Oh, where it gets incredibly cold, right?
Yeah, winter temperatures there routinely drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Achieving megawatt-level energy acceptance when the cell chemistry is literally deep frozen is a massive technical hurdle to overcome.
It really is a paradigm-shifting capability, though Darius Weedle did rightfully step in to clarify some of the viral claims that were circulating about it.
Oh yeah, people were stating the system adds 1,000 kilometers of range in 5 minutes.
Right. Weedle clarified that the 1,000 kilometers refers to the vehicle's theoretical maximum range under very specific testing cycles. The 5-minute charge actually adds closer to 400 kilometers.
Which, to be fair, is still incredible. Regaining 400 kilometers in the time it takes to buy a coffee fundamentally alters the travel experience.
It does, and here's where I want to introduce a psychological pushback to this whole race for speed. Do drivers actually need or even want a strict 5-minute charging stop on a long journey?
Well, Chris Jackson raised a brilliant counterargument regarding human factors engineering on this exact point.
Yeah, he pointed out that current 20 to 30-minute charging sessions actually map perfectly to recommended road safety breaks.
Right. He cites the UK Highway Code, which advises drivers to take a 15-minute break for every 2 hours of driving. By engineering the charging time down to 5 minutes, Jackson argues we might be eliminating a highly beneficial, unintended safety consequence of early EV adoption.
That's such a good point. Right now, the infrastructure forces drivers to stretch, hydrate, get a snack, and rest. If we compress that to 5 minutes, the human behind the wheel doesn't get the recovery time they actually need to drive safely.
And beyond the psychology, there is a severe economic reality check to the 5-minute dream. Thomas Gabor laid out the financial trap of megawatt charging for passenger vehicles using a really great analogy.
The water pipe analogy, right?
Exactly. Installing a megawatt charger can cost upwards of 900,000 euros just for the grid connection alone. And that's before you even factor in the hardware or the real estate.
So Gabor compares it to building a massive, highly pressurized water pipe to fill a swimming pool in 10 minutes.
Right. It sounds fantastic on paper, but an operator has to pay massive demand charges to the utility company to maintain that peak capacity 24/7.
Oh, right. So if private drivers are only utilizing that megawatt capacity for 5 minutes at a time, and then the charger just sits idle for the next hour, your energetic utilization rate completely plummets.
The unit economics just collapse. You are amortizing a 900,000 euro capital expense over tiny, really unpredictable bursts of energy sales.
The grid requires stability, and commercial operators require high, consistent utilization to reach profitability. Selling a 5-minute burst of power to a passenger car simply doesn't cover the baseline financing of the connection.
Which creates a fascinating contrast with the other end of the product spectrum, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or PHEVs. Because if megawatt charging is an over-engineered water pipe, John B.V. Kelly notes that some automakers are essentially handing drivers a thimble.
A thimble.
Yeah, he pointed out that manufacturers like Mitsubishi and Toyota are pairing relatively large 20 kilowatt-hour batteries in their PHEVs with incredibly weak 3.3 or 3.5 kilowatt onboard chargers.
Oh, wow. So it is literally the mobility equivalent of selling a top-tier smartphone, but forcing the user to charge it with a USB cable from 2010.
Exactly. Automakers do this to hit fleet emissions compliance targets on paper, keeping their internal component costs as low as possible. But the resulting user experience is so frustratingly slow that drivers simply stop plugging the vehicles in.
And Philip Van Jale shared the hard data proving this exact behavior. Real-world PHEV fuel consumption is currently averaging around 6 liters per 100 kilometers.
Which is roughly 3 times higher than the advertised laboratory figures.
All because the under-engineered charging hardware creates way too much friction for daily use.
Right. So if megawatt chargers are an economic trap for private passenger cars due to low utilization, and PHEVs are frustrating drivers with undersized hardware, who actually commands the utilization rates required to make high-power charging profitable?
Well, that brings us to Cluster 3. The answer is commercial freight and heavy transport. Matthias Speicher recently outlined why commercial fleets are the true anchor for this infrastructure. The key metric here is predictability.
Predictability, yes. Private passenger demand is just highly volatile. I mean, drivers charge at home, they travel seasonally, they switch routes based on traffic.
But commercial fleets operate on fixed schedules, predefined routes, and highly calculable energy demands.
And we are already seeing infrastructure deployments actively mirroring these logistics patterns. Jason Gies and Lauren McDonald analyzed Tesla's newly released map of 66 megawatt charging system, or MCS, sites.
Right, and those locations aren't just scattered arbitrarily to serve passenger road trips.
No, not at all. They are heavily clustered in Texas and California, strategically positioned near major maritime ports, distribution centers, and industrial corridors.
And this industrial alignment is happening in Europe as well. Alexander Young and Simon Nittler shared that AeroPulse is currently operating dedicated truck megawatt charging hubs along major German freight corridors, like the A7 and A2.
What is particularly interesting about sites like their Schwarmstedt location is that they are powered by dedicated solar parks. They're internalizing the energy production to stabilize costs.
But Jamie Sands offered a perspective on fleet electrification that I think fundamentally redefines how strategy leaders need to view these assets.
Oh, the business model point.
Yeah. Sands argues that transitioning a fleet to electric is not merely a fuel switch. It is not just swapping diesel pumps for cables. It is a complete business model transformation.
Because a traditional logistics depot is strictly a cost center. You park the trucks, you pay for maintenance, and you pay for fuel.
Exactly. But when you electrify that depot, you suddenly have hundreds of massive batteries sitting on site overnight. With smart charging infrastructure, that depot transforms into a highly flexible grid asset.
The arbitrage potential is just massive. Fleets can pull power from the grid during off-peak hours, say at 2 a.m. when wind turbines are overproducing and the wholesale energy price drops to near zero.
Right. Then, utilizing vehicle-to-grid, or V2G technology, they can discharge a portion of that stored power back into the grid during peak afternoon demand, effectively getting paid by the utility company.
It alters the total cost of ownership entirely, turning the fleet's downtime into an actual revenue stream. However, Sands points out a critical policy hurdle currently suffocating this model in markets like the UK.
The taxation issue.
Yeah. Current regulations treat the battery as an end user. This means the fleet is taxed on the energy they import and then taxed again on the energy they export back to the grid.
Wow, double taxation. That completely destroys the arbitrage margin. It turns what should be a grid-stabilizing asset back into a financial liability.
It does. But assuming the policy catches up, fleets still require absolute operational certainty to function. A logistics manager cannot dispatch a fully loaded truck to a public megawatt charger and just cross their fingers that a stall is available.
Right. Jens Rumer noted that the drive there and hope it's free model is entirely incompatible with commercial freight SLAs. Downtime is simply too expensive.
Which is where the software layer becomes the true differentiator. Nazar Davia and Lena Artemenko highlighted how GoTOU's advanced reservation technology is solving this exact bottleneck.
Oh, by implementing strict interval-based reservations. So operators can guarantee access for incoming trucks while simultaneously pushing their station utilization rates from a standard 25% up to 60 or 70%.
Exactly. The fleet gets their necessary uptime guarantee, and the operator secures the predictable revenue needed to amortize that massive grid connection.
Okay, so if commercial depots are proving that vehicles can operate as integrated grid assets, how does this level of market integration trickle down to everyday infrastructure? This is our final cluster.
Yeah, cluster 4. We are seeing the traditional boundaries between the mobility sector and the broader energy market completely dissolve.
Oliver Kruger addressed this convergence brilliantly. He argues that the industry needs to aggressively unlearn the gas station mentality.
I love that framing.
Yeah. When you pump diesel, you are buying a physical liquid stored in an underground tank at a fixed retail price. But charging an EV is entirely different. You are establishing digital access to a balancing group on the live energy grid.
Kruger points out that we should be bringing dynamic, wholesale energy markets directly to the plug. So when a driver connects their vehicle, they shouldn't be locked into the charge point operator's flat rate.
Right. The software should allow them to select the cheapest or greenest energy provider in real time based on live grid pricing. It effectively turns every charging session into a microtransaction on the energy market.
That level of dynamic interaction is crucial when you look at macro grid management. Marcus Schultz actually highlighted the massive, largely untapped potential of vehicle-to-home or V2H technology in Germany.
Oh, right, because the German grid is severely stressed by midday overproduction right now.
Exactly. Everyone's private rooftop solar panels peak at noon, flooding the grid with excess energy that nobody is using.
Well,
It's gotten to the point where the government is planning to end subsidies for small private installations.
the wasted potential there is just staggering. Schultz points out that Germany currently has 1.65 million EVs on the road. Cumulatively, that represents 107 gigawatt-hours of theoretical energy storage.
To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent capacity of 20 massive pump storage hydroelectric plants. And it is currently just sitting idle in office parking lots and residential driveways.
20 power plants
Yeah.
sitting there.
Yeah. If the industry properly incentivizes V2H integration, the solution basically builds itself. The vehicles absorb that excess solar production at noon when prices are negative, and then the owners use their cars to power their homes in the evening when grid demand and pricing spike.
It creates a perfect closed-loop system that stabilizes the national grid without pouring concrete for new power plants.
Exactly. But as this technology rapidly evolves and integrates into our daily lives, it creates some really fascinating administrative gray areas.
Like Neil Riddell's edge case question. I loved this one. He asked, if an employee driving a company fleet EV decides to go camping at a holiday park and charges the vehicle overnight using the park's infrastructure, does the company classify that as home charging or public charging for mileage reimbursement?
It's such a great example of how real-world behavior defies the neat categories of home, work, and public that operators use to build their pricing tiers. The boundaries are just blurring.
They really are. And property owners outside the traditional mobility sphere are waking up to this reality too. James Mathieson pointed out that the hospitality sector, specifically hotels, is finally realizing that EV charging is no longer just a niche amenity to check off a list.
Right, because of the guaranteed overnight dwell times. EV charging is a natural, highly profitable extension of their core business model.
It captures the vehicle's natural downtime while providing a seamless perk that dictates where a driver chooses to book their stay in the first place.
Which really brings us to the core insight tying all of these developments together. For the last decade, the mobility industry is obsessed almost exclusively over the vehicle itself, arguing over maximum range figures, infotainment screen dimensions, 0 to 60 times.
Right.
But looking at all these posts, it is abundantly clear that the winners of the next decade won't necessarily be the companies that manufacture the absolute best car. The winners will be the entities that master the invisible orchestration of time, energy, and infrastructure.
Wow, yes.
It's about who can seamlessly connect that deep frozen battery in Harbin, the solar-powered logistics hub in Germany, and the idle energy storage sitting in your driveway into one cohesive, profitable ecosystem.
If you enjoyed this episode, new episodes drop every 2 weeks. Also, check out our other editions on future mobility and market evolution, next-gen vehicle intelligence, and commercial fleet insights. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.